Greetings and welcome to an LGR thing, and this is going to be one of those that's all about that early 3D accelerator experience of the mid-90s, and in particular we're taking a look at this really rare beast right here. This is the Creative Labs 3D Blaster VLB, a rather physically large and pretty expensive card for its time. It was $349 during its initial launch window in the holiday season of 1995, debuting at that fall's Comdex show in Las Vegas. And this is from that era of extremely exciting transitions in the world of personal computing and the consumer space, just becoming more and more advanced on a month-to-month basis. Which was pretty clear at that Las Vegas show. 3D was huge at Comdex that year, with 3D games, 3D glasses, 3D capable VR headsets, and of course, 3D accelerators in the form of graphics cards like this fantastic, or debatably fantastic, Creative Labs 3D Blaster VLB. This card in particular is one of the first to try establishing a consumer 3D acceleration standard, and that's just one reason I've been wanting to cover it for so very, very long. I simply love this era of proto-standards, experimentation, and just tossing technical spaghetti at the wall and seeing what graphics, APIs, and games stick to it. And yeah, a huge thanks to LGR viewer Nathan for loaning this to me for this video. This is one of those holy grail kind of devices for anyone into early 3D graphics accelerators like this. So it's a huge privilege to finally be able to check this thing out. So yeah, throughout this video, we're going to be going over the PC gaming landscape surrounding the card's launch in '95, setting it up with an era-appropriate retro computer running the VL bus, and play a whole pile of games for it that rendered in graphics modes exclusive to the Creative Labs CT6200 Game Blaster. If you're into obsolete 3D, this is gonna be fascinating, I think. And the reason for that is really all about the context of when and how this was released, because this is from that time when everyone was racing to get the first consumer-focused 3D card on the market. You had companies like Number 9, S3, Diamond, Matrox, and of course 3DFX, all in the race to try and get there and get something out there that people would like, and of course they were all doing their own thing, and they pretty much all had one thing in common despite that though, and that was the PCI bus, which had been around since 1992 and had really become the go-to choice for Pentium systems in 93, 94, and into 95. But Creative Labs here, they didn't go that route, and instead they were the only 3D accelerator as far as I know that used the VESA local bus. So you have your standard 16-bit ISA right there, but then you got this little extra bit, and it was really kind of a stopgap in between 16-bit ISA and PCI, and a lot of 486 systems had it in the early 90s. Now, I'm assuming that one reason that they put this out instead of PCI is they were working on some PCI cards, but they weren't ready yet and they were trying to get to the market first. Well, it didn't work. What did end up getting to the market just before this was this right here. This is the Diamond Edge 3D. This is the 2000 series model. And this ended up crossing the finish line before the 3D Blaster with an NVIDIA NV1 based chipset, costing $299 for the 2 megabyte version. And yeah, see my super old video about this if you'd like to see more, or don't, because it's a super old video and I kind of don't like it. But anyway, it's a fascinating card in its own right, and is also a kind of holy grail type of experience for early 3D graphics enthusiasts on the PC. Did a bunch of cool things. It's got a built-in sound card, did Sega Saturn conversions, ported to the PC. Anyway, it's also worth noting that there were multiple 3D Blaster cards from Creative as well. So this is not the 3D Blaster PCI. That came out just like 6 months after this and used a Rendition Verite 1000 chip. That was $199, 4 megabytes on board instead of 2. It was just better received and better supported all around. And it's also not the 3D Blaster Voodoo cards like the Banshee or the Voodoo 2. Those, of course, were 3DFX based things. And yeah, it all used the 3D Blaster model name, but this is specifically the VLB that we're going to be taking a look at because it's the rarest. Although, you know, having just mentioned the Voodoo, it is kind of interesting that it also uses a pass-through setup, very much like what the 3DFX Voodoo cards, at least the earlier ones, were doing. where you had a 2D card that you needed in your computer in order to be able to get this going, and it passed that signal through the 3D blaster to your monitor. And all of the actual 3D stuff, the acceleration, was taken care of by the 3D Labs Game Glint, or GG chip, which was a kind of scaled down Glint 300TX chip from 1994. And that was more of a workstation thing designed for professional 3D modeling and rendering and CAD applications, things like that. Not consumer-oriented stuff at all. Whereas this thing was, and I mean, look at how ridiculously huge that QFP is. That is just a monstrous chip with a 25 megapixels per second fill rate and 2 megabytes of combined onboard memory. So 1 megabyte DRAM for texture and Z buffering, and a 1 megabyte VRAM frame buffer on the board for a combined 2 megabytes. And like pretty much all the other cards that were coming out around that time, it was using its own proprietary API. And with this one, it was known as the Creative Graphics Library, or CGL. And there were only a couple of cards from Creative that supported this, although they seemingly had much bigger plans for other chip manufacturers to be able to support it later on, but that never happened. And on its own, with this particular card right here, that's all it supports. Though there was DirectX support later on, if you had Windows 95 and you had an add-on memory board. As stated in the Windows 95 driver for this card, Microsoft DirectX requires 4 megabytes of memory on the 3D Blaster VLB for effective execution. Therefore, if you're interested in playing DirectX games on your 3D Blaster VLB, it is strongly recommended that you acquire the 2 megabyte upgrade module for this card. And that would plug in right here. You'd have a daughter board, 2 megs of memory, and just plop right on there. If you could find one. It was at least advertised. I found multiple ads for it, and it seems that it cost $49.95 at retail, but I haven't seen any photos. I haven't found a single person that has one or even ever had one. If you've got any pics or additional details on this board, please let me know. It's one of those forgotten bits of retro tech that's become absurdly hard to find, along with the main card itself. And it's really no surprise, seeing as the 3D Blaster VLB was never a big success, being replaced hardly 6 months after it launched. For all its theoretically high polygon pushing and texture mapping and Z buffering, the thing was still stuck with the Visa Local Bus in 1995. Which meant it was effectively restricted to 486 class PCs, since that's what the VL bus was most often paired with and was designed for in 1992. Now, that's not to say VLB Pentium motherboards don't exist. They did, but they weren't that common back then, and they're even less common now. I've only ever seen a few photos of these things online, and I've never come across one myself, so yeah, the CT6200 here was trying real hard to punch above its weight with VLB, regardless of the PC gaming world rapidly moving towards Pentiums with PCI motherboards. And contemporary reviews from journalists and customers alike were not kind. PC Format Magazine, for example, gave the card a pathetic 20 out of 100, stating that every single game performed so badly on a 486 that they were downright unplayable, and that its best feature was the box that it came in. Ouch. The reportedly abysmal performance was a common critique back then, as was the need for a 2D card alongside it, the lower number of games with CGL support, and the fact that it didn't come with a sound card on board. Yeah, it seems silly now. Oh, my video card doesn't have a sound card on it. Well, yeah, remember its closest competitor though was the Diamond Edge, and that had a 16-bit sound chipset right on the card. Whatever though, both cards flopped in their own unique ways, with both becoming unobtainium decades later. How poetic. 3D Labs themselves continued on, at least even without Creative Labs' partnership. They went on to release the Per Media series of cards from 1996 to 1999 or so, and while their cards were once again geared towards workstation 3D and CAD things, they also added support for Direct3D and OpenGL because hey, PC gamers got money too, so why not? On that note, there are 13 or 14 games known to support the 3D Blaster VLB. 4 of them were bundled with the CT6200, High Octane, Magic Carpet Plus, NASCAR Racing, and Rebel Moon, with Rebel Moon in particular being a standout title since it was exclusive to the first 2 3D Blasters. Though it did get a retail sequel, Rebel Moon Rising, which I also have, but it supports all your standard rendering modes and it's a bit of a different thing, so yeah. And it also seems that Flight Unlimited was a 5th pack-in game at 1.2, so we'll have to try that out as well. And by the way, a huge thanks to Vets on the Vogons forums for not only making a lot of great posts about this card and other early 3D cards over the years, but also hooking me up with these VLB exclusive editions of the pack-in games. And that's enough of the random preamble ramble. Let's go ahead and get things installed in a mid-90s PC, set up all the drivers and software, and test it out with some CGL DOS games and see what it was like to own a $350 3D graphics accelerator in 1995. Okay, so I've got the LGR Woodgrain PC going here, with the card already installed. And in terms of getting it installed, it was very simple stuff, just a straightforward VLB card installation, and that goes into a slot down here near the bottom of the board. It's always a bit of a pain getting VLB cards installed because you have those extra set of connectors on the far end. Just makes it a little bit of a thing to get in there. But once it's in, that's pretty much that. It's going to be working alongside the existing 2D only card. It is also a VLB card that's in there, a Cirrus Logic chipset. But yeah, that only does 2D, and then of course they're both going to be in there at the same time, and it is a pass-through situation. So the output of the old card goes in to the 3D Blaster VLB, and then the output of the VLB goes to our monitor and my capture situation. And yeah, this is going to be a bit of a nightmare in terms of getting this camera, or any camera really, to match up with the refresh rates because it's constantly changing through here, and so I'm going to be going back and forth between direct capture and not. So yeah, once you get the drivers installed, you get a couple of directories, and just real quick, the installation for that was an interesting thing as well, because this is a full plug-and-play card for both DOS and Windows. Setting up the IRQ and different memory addresses and just everything that it needs in terms of resources on the card itself, and it does it through software. There aren't jumpers on the card itself, because yeah, plug and play, or plug and pray. It got this stuff put in here, and let's go have this. We got a DOS directory with some programs, and actually some of it runs in Init 3D, actually runs on startup, and provides you with a nice little message at the boot of your computer. As it loads into DOS, it's just letting you know that 3D Blaster has been initialized, and that's good, but it's also no guarantee that it actually did so. It just means that the software is there. So you actually go into this Test 3D application. Yeah, again, sorry for the refresh rate. I'm going to switch over to a direct capture. And this is just a utility for verifying the 3D Blaster control region, frame buffer, IO port, addresses, and interrupt. And yeah, it just runs through a bunch of tests to make sure that nothing is conflicting, because you can set up all of these things however you want to in the setup program when you first install it, but that doesn't mean it's actually going to work. It's relying completely on the other things in your system not conflicting. Then once all the testing is done for interrupts and such, it brings up another section for checking out the different video modes, resolutions, and refresh rates, making sure that it can display it on your display, which is this right here. So we've got 4 different things here, and again, sorry about the refresh rate weirdness, but this one is cool. So we got 640 by 400, 70 Hertz is testing the color. We've got a gradient for monochrome here. And then it goes through 3 more of them, different refresh rates and different resolutions, with the maximum one being actually less than 60 Hertz. That's interesting. And then once those are done, we got a utility here to run a demo to verify that 3D Blaster is working. And yeah, check that out. That is 3D acceleration in DOS. How impressive. We got a demonstration of the perspective correct textures and some kind of animations, I guess, of scaling of textures going on, Z buffer and whatnot. I don't know exactly everything this is showing off. Also, check this out. I cannot get any of the 3D Blaster modes when it's in 3D acceleration to work on this particular monitor, at least with the geometry. It's always throwing things off, and yeah, I have adjusted literally everything on here to try to get it, but it freaks out, man. Sometimes there's all kinds of different situations where if I take the settings too far, it gets way, way more out of whack. So this right here is about as good as I can get it, and sometimes it won't even sync to the refresh rate at all, like when it goes below 60 Hertz. It worked fine on my LCD, and thank goodness my capture device setup over there handles this. But yeah, it's just all kinds of strange. And with that being said, let's go into Windows real quick, because this is cool. Don't have sound configured right now, but yeah, check it out. High-res Windows 3.1. We do have the 3D Blaster control panel now, so that's this. And right now I've got it set to the highest, at least in terms of resolution, 1024 by 768 at 60 Hertz and 256 colors. But there's also 800 by 600 at various refresh rates, and down to 640 by 480 up to 75 Hertz, and you can do 16-bit color as well. But yeah, that's what this is. And it's just neat to see things in higher resolution in Windows 3.1 at all, which, you know, I could do with my Diamond Speedstar and other things. I've actually covered Windows 3.1 2D Accelerator and LGR in the past, if you'd like to see that. That went all the way up to 1280 by 1024, if I recall. So yeah, this is not meant to accelerate Windows exactly. It can do it. It's not geared towards Windows 2D. Another thing it's not geared to do is touch anything that is not that creative CGL API. Instead, it was just doing similar to, again, like what the 3DFX Voodoo cards were doing just a year later. It relied on your existing 2D, non-3D accelerator card that you have in the system, which means that it runs just as crappy as it did before. Wow.
Let's rock. Damn, those idiot bastards are gonna pay for shooting up my ride.
Yep, it's just as terrible because it's not affecting anything. So you can run any of your older games that are not built for the 3D Blaster VLB. They're not going to be affected. They're not going to be any better or worse. They're just the same. In fact, as a direct example of that, you can unplug the Creative Labs card entirely and then just switch your monitor over to your existing 2D card, and you'll still see the game coming through because, I mean, that's what it's doing. It's still running there. So anyway, I thought that was kind of fun. But speaking of which, let's go over and actually play some actual CGL games, starting with Rebel Moon. And yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I believe it is exclusive to the Creative Labs 3D Blasters. In fact, when you're setting it up, you get a message straight away saying that it requires a 3D Blaster. And in particular, this one requires the VLB. There's a VLB version and a PCI version for both of the 3D Blasters because, of course, the PCI was using a Rendition Verite chipset instead. I quite like the ambience and overall vibe of this. And here we go. Oh yeah, controls. 3D acceleration on a 486. And it's not the smoothest experience in the world, at least on this particular configuration. You know, but it's trying. It's trying real hard. And yeah, let me just switch over to a direct capture here because I feel like it. So yeah, honestly, it's kind of impressive and not at the same time. I like the overall aesthetic of the game. You know, it's got kind of a semi-marathon vibe with some very clear Doom influences, of course, but I mean, it's just a neat looking game. But again, that performance is immediately disappointing. It's just not great, especially when you have a whole bunch of action going on, a bunch of dudes on screen shooting and explosions and sound effects and music and, you know, the whole thing. And this is not exactly the slowest 486 at the moment. I mean, it's not a 486. I actually have a Pentium Overdrive installed into the 486 socket. It's running a bit faster than a DX266, but honestly just not as fast as it should, or as much as you would think, I suppose, for a Pentium Overdrive system. Yeah, I've covered this before in LGR if you'd like to know more about it, but my point being that this is not the slowest system, so you would hope that even more of the heavy lifting would be moved over to the graphics card side of things, and the 3D Blaster 3D Accelerator would accelerate things in 3D and blast them away, but the performance is just kind of so-so. Now, that being said, this is not a game that has a software mode, at least not by default. I think maybe it's been modded to do that, but I don't have the modded version. This is just the one that came with the card. So, yeah. I can't exactly compare it to what it would be without the 3D Blaster. So instead, we are going to move on to something where we can do a direct comparison to how it was without the 3D Blaster and how it is with it. So I've got all these games to test out. So all the bundled games, as well as a few retail releases that supported it. And yeah, we'll move on to NASCAR Racing here because it's always a good test. So yeah, this one installs. It doesn't actually ask you about the 3D Blaster VLB or anything, but it's definitely a different version. And straight away, this part is higher resolution. And then when you get to the menu, well, I forgot you have this little intro thing here. But yeah, immediately just higher resolution all across the board. Fantastic looking sharp textures and graphics and everything. And you get an idea of the performance. It is fine, I guess. So the menu is different. That's a thing. And all the graphics options, I believe they're all exactly the same as they are in just the regular version of the game, non-accelerated in software mode. Urgh, so loud. Oh, they're leaving me behind. No. Ah, geez, I just noticed the refresh rate is ridiculous on this game, so that's just silly. I'll move over to a direct capture here. So yeah, as you can see, the game looks really good for what it is. If you're familiar with the game without 3D acceleration, I mean, this should look amazing. The performance, you know, it's not unplayable by any means, but it is also just not great. And sure, you can turn off all the textures and effects and things like that, but then what's the point of using this ridiculous, what was a $350 3D accelerator card back in the day? If you gotta turn everything off, and you can't change the resolution. In this, or pretty much any of the other games that use CGL, like one or two of them, I think, allow you to change the resolution in accelerated mode, but most of them don't. And so you're stuck with that performance for the most part, and a lot of it's just relying on the rest of your computer. The memory, the CPU, hard disk, that kind of stuff. And this right here is a comparison to the regular retail version of NASCAR Racing running without any kind of 3D acceleration whatsoever. So this is just 2D card and software mode, relying on your whatever you got installed in terms of the CPU and your graphics. Yeah, you're pretty much getting the same thing, just much lower res, and honestly, the performance is comparable or sometimes even better. I don't know, I don't have any way to measure this directly, but yeah, it's mostly the increase in resolution and just overall clarity. It looks much tighter on 3D acceleration, which you would expect. But man, it'd be so much cooler if you had like a way faster computer to put this in, but you're limited by the VL bus, and 486 and all that. Alrighty, so next pack-in game, I've got Magic Carpet Plus. Another one of those where you can't really change anything in terms of the settings. You got sound, and that's pretty much it. And I'm gonna go ahead and swap over directly to direct capture here and just show the thing running because it takes a few minutes to get into, and I don't feel like waiting right now. If you're familiar with just original Magic Carpet non-accelerated, this looks pretty cool. You have some different graphics for the heads-up display. It's a little sharper, a little more detail, and then the overall world geometry. I don't know if the actual geometry is increased, but with the higher resolution, you can certainly see more detail in the hills and the mountains and tree pieces and all that kind of stuff. The draw distance doesn't seem to be any notably better or worse. It's just kind of bad no matter what. And probably a good thing because the performance is so bad. It is much more playable in software mode on this particular computer, and that just sucks. I genuinely would much rather have a lower resolution yet faster kind of gameplay than a higher resolution, crispier menus and graphics and stuff. It's so slow, especially during combat when you're shooting crap, and if there's just multiple things on the screen at once beyond the basic landscape and a few little things dotting the ground. It's practically unplayable. Yeah, I don't recommend it. At least not on here. You know, if I had this on an actual Pentium system or even much more capable 486, it'd be pretty good, I imagine, but not on this configuration. Okay, we're going to be moving on here to another Bullfrog game. We got High Octane, and this actually runs on the Magic Carpet engine, or I guess an updated version of it. Okay, moving over to Direct Capture here, and yeah, you can tell that the menus are slower for one thing, but also higher resolution. So the track selection, yeah, you got higher resolution tracks spinning around, and then the vehicles, of course, also look sharper, but slower. That much is clear immediately. And then once you get into a race or a battle or whatever you want to call it in this game, the performance, man, it is what it is. So yeah, this is actually one of the few games for this card where the VLB mode on this system actually does make, I think, an objective improvement all across the board, frame rate included, even though it's still not a good frame rate. It's better than software mode, which we'll compare it to in a moment. But yeah, you do get slightly better speed, and that's nice in a racing game, but it's also a combat game, and you want to be able to pick out your targets, so a greater resolution, just sharper imagery all around, and some nice crispy looking overlaid graphics and stuff for your ammo count and all these things. They just look nicer in the CGL mode. The 3D Blaster VLB does a pretty respectable job, and yeah, here it is compared to the software renderer. As you can see, of course, much lower resolution, but actually worse performance. Kind of surprised to see that, because up to this point, the CGL modes were running pretty badly compared to software mode. And another thing I wanted to point out, like, look at the sky, the textures, you're getting some different things going on between the two. You actually have a little bit more texture in software. I also noticed that on Magic Carpet Plus, and I think some of the textures in NASCAR racing, I don't know. It seems like there's just trade-offs and concessions you might not think are going to be there until you do the direct comparison. It's just like, oh, okay, well, that's different too. But yeah, High Octane on the 3D Blaster VLB. Pretty good stuff, although still not great with this particular system. So yeah, the pattern here is pretty obvious at this point, I think. Even with all the games that were bundled with it, you think those would be some just fantastic examples of this running as it should. And well, I guess that is how it should run. It's just not very great on these kind of systems from that era. So what are you going to do, right? On the other hand, there is one of them that doesn't even work at all, so it could be worse, right? Flight Unlimited. I don't know why. I wasn't able to get it to work, at least with the version that was provided for me from Vets. And I also tried another version, burned on like better media at a much slower speed, actually down at 2x. That didn't work either. Tried multiple installations, tried another download. None of them worked. It crashes every time that you try to load up the Creative Blaster VLB version of the game. And it just sticks on the Looking Glass logo, and that's as far as I could get with Flight Unlimited, which sucks because it looked pretty darn cool. In fact, if you look at the YouTube video that Vets put up on his channel, a Retro Compact Guy, and you can see some of the footage of Flight Unlimited running on his VLB. It looks pretty awesome. It's a faster system than mine too. Better performance is going to help any of these games, but a flight game especially. All right, so the last ones that I have are just a few retail game releases that supported the VLB either on a disc or through a downloadable patch that you could get from the game developer or publisher. The first one I tested out was Battle Arena Toshinden, the very first one. And this is another one of those where it seemed like it was gonna work just fine. In fact, I had a message on the menu. It's like, oh, VLB detected. Everything was going fine. I just wanted to get into a fight. And then once I got in there, it crashed every single time. Again, burned multiple copies. Downloaded another ISO. Tried to see if there was any kind of settings I could change around. There was not. So, don't know. I don't know. It just didn't want to work at all. Did get it at least a little bit further, I suppose, than Flight Unlimited did. So another one, next one I want to try out, retail game, Euro 96. This was one I believe I had to get a patch for the retail version to get it to work, but it does now support the 3D Blaster VLB, so that's fun. Switching over to direct capture here, and you can see that in the menus, yeah, we got some more options. In fact, this is one of the few that lets you change around the resolution, low and high. And both of those are higher res than the software modes low or high. On the 3D Blaster, I think it's 640 by 480 and 800 by 600. And on software, I believe it's 320 by 200 and 640 by 400.
Spain against Bulgaria. Bulgaria, the winners of Group 7, where they qualified ahead of Germany. The team, you remember, they beat in the quarterfinals of the World Cup in the United States. No doubt that we have a closely fought contest in prospect here. Hierro.
Right, so on the one hand, this is running an 800 by 600 3D accelerated in DOS. That's just wild, especially on a 486 or Pentium Overdrive in a 486 motherboard in this case. But is this really what you would consider playable, especially when you're playing against a computer? Because a computer just doesn't care about frame rate. It's going to calculate and do the same crap regardless. Now, if you're, say, playing head-to-head against another person, you're both on the same crappy boat, so maybe then it wouldn't be as bad. But you still don't want to play at a frame rate like this, no matter how impressive the resolution is. And of course, moving on to the software renderer comparison, and you know, it's not terribly better. Though I believe the frame rate is a little smoother in software. It certainly felt like it when I was playing them both back to back, but honestly, it's just bad either way with this game. Just the fact that it's running it at all in either mode is pretty cool to me. But yeah, is the increase in resolution worth the lackluster performance? Probably not. And as a result, you've got a pretty lackluster sport experience here. So, the final one that I want to try here is Fatal Racing, also known as Whiplash. Another one of those retail releases that I believe supported it out of the box in some versions. And then there was 1.0 that you need a downloadable patch. I've got the one with the patch, which has this FAT3D executable that you run to run the game. Yeah! I was happy to see this one run well after all the other fails. So this one has some interesting caveats in terms of the way I was able to get it running, the configuration. Now the graphics detail settings I do have the same when I was comparing this to software mode. And then you have this VGA display and SVGA, which will switch between the resolutions. So I got those the same, but for whatever reason there's this. And when you run the 3D Blaster version of it, it restricts you to this 4 meg version of it. Whereas in software, it had me in the 8 meg version. And I do have a 16 meg setup here in the system in terms of RAM, so I'm assuming that's what it means. I don't know why I'm restricted to one or the other though, depending on my renderer, but I am, so they do look different. Switch over to direct capture. There's really crazy amounts of dithering on the 3D Blaster, which certainly helps the performance. It just looks very different. So the comparison isn't exactly the most direct between the two in terms of the visuals and the way it runs. Either way though, it's an interesting comparison, I thought. And yeah, I hadn't actually played this game very much either, and it was pretty fun. I quite enjoy it. And I found it entirely playable. I quite enjoy both rendering modes, you know, with or without the dithering, higher resolution or not. It's just a neat looking game either way. And is yet another bullet point on this card not entirely performing maybe as you'd expect, especially for $349 in 1995. So yeah, that is where I'm gonna call it for this video. It has gone on a really long time. Just looking at my recording, oh man, why do I have 4 hours of footage to edit down? I do. It's crazy. But anyway, fascinating card. I hope that you've enjoyed seeing it in action. There's just this whole era of early 3D acceleration is downright fascinating, especially these failed ones where they were barely on the market for less than a year, and they were completely obsolete within like 6 months by something in its own product range. The follow-up 3D Blaster, the PCI version, was just so much better, or at least I assume. I don't know, I've never used it, but on paper it should be a lot better. But yeah, that's about it. Let me know if you ever used one of these back in the day, and I hope you enjoyed seeing it here in 2021. And if you enjoyed this episode of LGR, then do stick around for the others that I've got planned. I got a new video each week when all goes well. And I've covered a bunch of other graphics cards and retro PC related things on the channel, so check out the older stuff if you'd like. And as always, thank you very much for watching.